I'm the only one that dressed like their favorite character. Eh. No, it's cool. It's cool, it's fine. Uh, I'll just go ahead and take off my TikTok croc hat. And just... Now that awkwardness is out of the way. Welcome back to Storytime Theatre, everybody. My name is Benny, and I'll be your storyteller for today. So, quick recap on Peter Pan, the book that we're almost finished with, y'all. Look at that. That's all we have left. Chapter 15 was a bit of an emotional roller coaster. There was fighting, and that was it. The boys and Wendy and Peter are all just hanging on the ship. So let's head back and meet up with them and see what we have in store for us today as we read Chapter 16, The Return Home. By 3 bells next morning, they were all stirring their stumps. For there was a big sea running, and Toodles the Buzzin was among them, with a rope's end in his hand and chewing tobacco. They all donned pirate clothes, cut off at the knee, shaved smartly, and tumbled up with the true nautical roll and hitching their trousers. Aw, the Lost Boys became pirates, and Toodles is the first mate! This is adorable. It need not be said who was captain. Nibs and John were first and second mate. Oh, I lied. Toodles is not the first mate. Then what's a bosun? I really should figure that out up until this point. There was a woman aboard. Yeah, Wendy. No, like that You didn't have to say that, man. Peter had already lashed himself to the wheel, but he piped all hands and delivered a short address to them. He had hoped that they would do their duty like gallant hearties, but they knew they were the scum of the Rio and the Gold Coast. And if they snapped at him, he would tear them. His bluff-stricken words struck the note sailors understand, and they cheered him lustily. Then a few sharp orders were given, and they turned the ship round and nosed her for the mainland. Captain Peter calculated, after consulting the ship's chart, that if this weather lasted, they would strike the Azores by the 21st of June, after which it would save time to fly. Instead of watching the ship, however, we must now return to the desolate home from which 3 of our characters had taken heartless flight so long ago. No, keep me on the pirate ship. I don't want to go back to the house full of all the descriptions. Please don't make me go. It seems a shame to have neglected number 14 all this time. And yet, we may be sure that Mrs. Darling does not blame us. If we had returned sooner to look with sorrow sympathy at her, she would probably have cried. Don't be silly. What do I matter? Do go back and keep an eye on the children. So long as mothers are like this, their children will take advantage of them, and they may lay to that. Even now we venture into the familiar nursery only because its lawful occupants are on their way home. We are merely hurrying on in advance of them to see that their beds were properly aired, and that Mr. and Mrs. Darling do not go out for the evening. Why on earth should their beds be properly aired, seeing that they left them in such a thankless hurry? Would it not serve them jolly well right if they came back and found that their parents were spending the weekend in the country? It would be the moral lesson they have been in need for ever since we met them. But if we contrive things in this way, Mrs. Darling would never forgive us. Only change to be seen in the night nursery is that between 9 and 6, the kennel is no longer there. When the children flew away, Mr. Darling felt in his bones that all the blame was his for having chained Nana up, and that from first to last she had been wiser than he. Of course, as we have seen, he was quite a simple man. Indeed, he might have passed for a boy again if he had been able to take his baldness off. But he had also a noble sense of justice and a lion courage to do what seemed right to him. And having thought the matter out with anxious care after the flight of the children, He went down on all fours and crawled into the kennel. To all Miss Darling's dear invitations to him to come out, he replied sadly but firmly, "No, my own one. This is the place for me." In the bitterness of his remorse, he swore that he would never leave the kennel until his children came back. Every morning the kennel was carried with Mr. Darling in it to a cab, which conveyed him to his office, and he returned home in the same way at 6. Something of strength of character of the man will be seen if we remember how sensitive he was to the opinion of neighbors. This man, whose every movement now attracted surprised attention. Inwardly, he must have suffered torture, but he preserved a calm exterior even when the young criticized his little home, and he always lifted his hat courteously to any lady who looked inside. On that eventful Thursday week, Miss Darling was in the night nursery awaiting George's return home, a very sad-eyed woman. Now that we look at her closely and remember the gaiety of her in the old days, all gone now just because she had lost her babes, I find I won't be able to say nasty things about her after all. If she was too fond of her rubbishy children, she couldn't help it. Look at her in her chair, where she has fallen asleep. The corner of her mouth, where one looks first, is almost withered up. Her hand moves stresslessly on her breast, as if she had the pain there. Supposed to make her happy, we whisper to her in her sleep that the brats are coming back. They are really within 2 miles of the window now, and flying strong, but all we need whisper is that they are on their way. Let's. It is a pity we did, for she has started up, calling their names, and there is no one in the room but Nana. Oh, Nana, I dreamt my dear ones had come back. Nana had filmy eyes, but all she could do was to put her paw gently on her mistress's lap, and they were sitting together thus when the kennel was brought back. As Mr. Darling puts his head out at it to kiss his wife, we see that his face is more worn than of yore, but has a softer expression. Social success had not spoiled him. It had made him sweeter. For some time he sat with his head out of the kennel, talking with Mrs. Darling of this success, and pressing her hand reassuringly when she said she hoped his head would not be turned by it. "But if I had been a weak man," he said. "Good heavens, if I had been a weak man!" "And George," she said timidly, "you are full of remorse as ever, aren't you?" "Full of remorse as ever, dearest. See my punishment living in a kennel." "But it is a punishment, isn't it, George? You are sure you're not just enjoying it?" "My love." You may be sure she begged his pardon. And then, feeling drowsy, he curled round in the kennel. "Won't you play me to sleep?" he asked. "On the nursery piano?" And as she crossed to the day nursery, he added thoughtlessly, "And shut that window, I feel a draught." "Oh, George, you never asked me to do that. The window must always be left open for them, always. Always." Now it was his turn to beg her pardon. And she went into the day nursery and played. And soon he was asleep. And while he slept, Wendy, John, and Michael flew into the room. Oh no, we have written it so, because that was the charming arrangement planned by them before we left the ship. But something must have happened since then, for it is not they who have flown in, but Peter and Tinker Bell. Peter's first words tell all. "Quick, Tink," he whispered. "Close the window. Bar it." "That's right. Now you and I must get away by the door, and when Wendy comes, she will think her mother has barred her out, and she will have to go back with me." Peter, I was rooting for you. We were all rooting for you. And now you do this. Boy. Now I understand what had hitherto puzzled me. Why, when Peter had exterminated the pirates, he did not return to the island and leave Tink to escort the children to the mainland. This trick had been in his head all the time. Instead of feeling that he was behaving badly, he danced with glee. Then he peeped into the day nursery to see who was playing. He whispered to Tink, "It's Wendy's mother. She is the pretty lady, but not so pretty as my mother. Her mouth is full of thimbles, but not so full as my mother's was." Of course, he knew nothing whatsoever about his mother, but he sometimes liked to brag about her. He did not know the tune, which was Home Sweet Home, but he knew it was saying, "Come back, Wendy, Wendy, Wendy." And he cried exultantly, "You will never see Wendy again, lady, for the window is barred." He peeped in again to see why the music had stopped. And now he saw that Mrs. Darling had laid her head on the box, and that 2 tears were sitting in her eyes. "She wants me to unbar the window," Peter thought, "but I won't. Not I." He peeped again, and the tears were still there, or another 2 had taken its place. "She's awfully fond of Wendy," he said to himself. He was angry with her now for not seeing why she could not have Wendy. The reason was simple. "I'm fond of her too. We can't both have her, lady." "Well, finally, way to admit your feelings." But the lady would not make the best of it, and he was unhappy. He ceased to look at her, but even then she would not let go of him. He skipped about and made funny faces, but when he stopped, it was just as if she were inside him, knocking. "All right," he said at last, and gulped, and then he unbarred the window. "Come on, Tink," he cried with a frightful sneer. "We don't want any silly mothers." And he flew away. Thus Wendy and John and Michael found the window open after all, which of course was more what they deserved. They alighted on the floor, quite ashamed of themselves, and the youngest one had already forgotten his home. "John," he said, looking around doubtfully, "I think I have been here before." "Of course you have, silly. There's your old bed." "So it is," Michael said, but not with much conviction. "I say," John cried, "the kennel!" And he dashed across to look into it. "Perhaps Nana is inside of it," Wendy said, but John whistled. "Hello," he said. "There's a man inside it." "It's Father!" Wendy exclaimed. "Let me see Father," Michael begged eagerly, and he took a good look. "He is not so big as the pirate I killed," he said with frank disappointment that I'm glad Mr. Darling was asleep for. It would have been sad if those had been the first words he heard little Michael say. Wendy and John had been taken aback somewhat in finding their father in the kennel. "Surely," John, like one who had lost faith in his memory, "he used to not sleep in a kennel." "John," Wendy said flatteringly, "perhaps we don't remember the old life as well as we thought we did." A chill fell upon them, and served them right. "It is very careless of Mother," said John, "not to be here when we come back." It was then that Miss Darling began playing again. "It's Mother!" Wendy cried, peeping. "So it is," said John. "Then are you not really our mother, Wendy?" asked Michael, who was surely sleepy. "Oh dear," exclaimed Wendy, with her first real twinge of remorse. "It was quite time we come back." "Let us creep in," John suggested, "and put our hands out over our eyes." But Wendy, who saw that they must break the joyous news more gently, had a better plan. "Let us all slip into our beds and be there when she comes in, just as if we had never been away." And so, when Mrs. Darling went back to the night nursery to see if her husband was asleep, all the beds were occupied. The children waited for her joy of cry, but it did not come. She saw them and did not believe that they were there. You see, she saw them in their beds so often in her dreams that she thought she was just dreaming again. She sat down in the chair by the fire where in the old days she had nursed them. They could not understand this, and a cold fear fell upon all 3 of them. "Mother!" Wendy cried. That's Wendy, she said, but still she was sure it was a dream. Mother! That's John, she said. Mother! Cried Michael. He knew her now. That's Michael, she said, and she stretched out her arms for the 3 little selfish children they would never envelop again. Yes, they did. They went round Wendy and John and Michael, who had slipped out of bed, and ran to her. George! George! She cried when she could speak, and Mr. Darling woke to share her bliss, and Nana came rushing in. There could not have been a lovelier sight, but there was none to see it except a little boy who was staring in the window. He had ecstasies innumerable that other children can never know, but he was looking through the window at the one joy from which he must be forever barred. And that, my friends, is the end of chapter 16 of Peter Pan. It was such a good chapter, such a heartwarming chapter. The children are home now and everything's good. We do have one more chapter to go, though. So I hope you all will join me next time for our final chapter, chapter 17, When Wendy Grows Up. Stay safe, everyone, and I'll see you next time. Wait, we're almost done the book?